Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. I don't know whether I'll be joined by Dee Pierce tonight. I was kind of expecting her, but she may not have been able to show up. Anyway, our topics for tonight are emoluments, also no deal, which refers to the United States and Iran and those particular negotiations. Our third topic is, does President Trump have an understanding of Russia? I'm asked Steve Wolfbrand. Hey, Steve, how are you? Nice to see you. Our fifth topic is the pursuit of forever war by the EU nations. A little strange. Our next topic is the INSTC, which is the new trade corridor, which Iran is attempting to complete. So we'll cover some aspects of that. And finally, it appears that China is winning its competition with the United States. And we have two very good pieces on that for you. So I'm sure you'll find that very interesting. I'm going to start off by sharing the video on Facebook. If you'll give me a second or two. Yes. There we go. So, Catherine Lewandowski is here. Hi, Catherine. It's very nice to see you. It's been a while. Hello, Evelina. How are you? Very nice to see you. And Dolores is joining me right now.
Yes, hello, how are you?
Hello, Dee. I'm fine. How are you?
Okay, I was having a little bit of connection problems.
Uh,
But
I was wondering whether the weekend had somehow interfered.
no, it was just connection issues. So
Okay. Well, of course, I've had those at various times. We all
yes,
have those sometimes,
yes, we do.
technical difficulties. So I've gone over the topics for tonight, but I'm going to start off with the topic, of emoluments, the emoluments clause in the Constitution. And we have a very good piece, on that.
Okay, and I'll
Okay.
start sharing the show out.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And then you can have the second piece and we can alternate as we usually do.
Okay.
It's a great piece called No Enrichment Means No Deal, and it's by Mike Whitney
Oh, that should be good.
for months. So I think you'll enjoy doing that one. I've already shared on Facebook myself, but I'm going to share the screen for the first of our pieces, which is by Michael Brock. Okay, Mike
Okay.
Brock, the philosopher. It was written on May 21st on his Substack, Notes from the Circus. And the title of this is The Emoluments Clause is Not a Suggestion.
Hmm.
Even though the American people seem intent on viewing it as a suggestion somehow, Trump has been violating the Emoluments Clause since the first day of his first term when he had the Saudis at his Washington hotel. But anyway, he's still violating it, but even more outrageously all the time. But here is Mike's piece on that, and there's a picture, okay, of Abraham Lincoln, the famous statue inside of Washington, D.C. Once long ago, I had an interesting experience with that particular, with the monument. I was riding along some other people, and we were driving into D.C. in order to attend the Vietnam teach-in, and we'd had a long ride, uh, punctuated by choral singing of "Baby, the Rain Must Fall." And we arrived in D.C. about 4 p.m. In the morning. And being graduate students at the time, we decided to go see Mr. Lincoln. And so we went to the monument, stayed for a few minutes, and were promptly chased out by a security guard before too much time had passed. But it was all very good natured. No thought of terrorism back then. Wasn't, an issue. This was in 1963, so it was quite a few years ago. Anyway, Mike starts 2 plus 2 equals 4. There are 24 hours, 24 hours in a day. And when the President of the United States accepts the benefit of a $500 million private aircraft from a monarchy, a foreign monarchy, we are not in the realm of clever politics. We are in the realm of constitutional crisis. Let us dispense with the fiction. The story is that this jet provided by Qatar is not a personal gift to Trump, but a donation to his presidential library. That this future-oriented asset somehow places the arrangement outside the prohibitions of the Constitution's Foreign Emoluments Clause. That the benefit is institutional, not personal. But here is the legal analysis. The president is receiving the benefit. He will use the plane. He will enjoy the prestige, the utility, the access, the end. The Foreign Emoluments Clause was written by men who feared one thing above all: the corruption of American governance by foreign powers. They did not say the president could accept gifts with the right paperwork. They did not say the president could accept personal benefit so long as he named the public purpose. They said, quote, "No person holding any office of profit or trust under them shall, without the consent of the Congress, accept of any present, emolument, office, or title of any kind whatever from any king, prince, or foreign state," unquote. There is no ambiguity here. There is no legal footnote. There is no interpretive wiggle room. A gift is a gift. A benefit is a benefit.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes from a foreign state. It is prohibited unless Congress explicitly consents. Trump has not received consent. He has not asked for consent. He has not acknowledged that consent is required. And now lawyers are lining up to tell us that perhaps the arrangement skirts the rules,
We have to take the whole thing apart.
that perhaps there's a legal theory that makes it all acceptable, that perhaps the commitment to use the jet for his library turns it into something else. This is not legal interpretation. This is sophistry in the service, in the service of power. Let us not pretend this is complicated. The clause is not a regulation. It is not a statute. It is not a policy. It is a constitutional prohibition, one of the earliest, one of the clearest, one of the most um, um, unambiguous. To accept a gift from a foreign prince is to violate the Constitution. To benefit from it without consequence is to mock the rule of law. And to argue otherwise is to participate in the erosion of uh, 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 the Republic. Yes, I completely agree. And this is what is most dangerous: the normalization of law breaking as spectacle, the institutionalization of excuses, the transformation of plain text into an academic puzzle, the elevation of legal cleverness over moral clarity. If the Foreign Emoluments Clause cannot be enforced here, it cannot be enforced at all. If this is not a violation and the clause is a dead letter, and if the clause is dead letter, then so is the principle of uncorrupted governance. This is not a partisan matter. It is a constitutional matter. It is an American matter. And if you cannot say clearly that this is wrong, regardless of your party, your preferences, your priors, then you have already surrendered to the logic of tyranny. You will not find a defense of this in the writings of Hamilton or Madison. You will not find it in the precedent of Lincoln or Roosevelt. You will find it only in the halls of power that believe they are beyond constraint,
Mhm.
and in the legal profession that um, 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 enables them. But the truth is still the truth. Trump is accepting the benefit of a foreign gift. That gift is of immense value. It is being delivered under the color of a legitimacy, but in direct violation of the Constitution. There is no workaround. There is no footnote. There is only the truth. And in this moment, speaking it clearly is not just uh, um, right. Uh, um, 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 it is patriotism. And that's it. A simple statement, by uh, uh, um, um, by Mike Brock.
Mhm.
A very strong statement, a very clear statement. It looks like Trump is having trouble with accepting the plane. The foreign prince, okay, that offered it, or the foreign king, okay, that offered it, seems to be hedging right now. The Congress is uncomfortable with it. Doesn't look as though Trump is going to get this plane. but he is moaning and he is angry about it and he is whining about that. But let us not respond to those kinds of protests.
Mm-hmm.
It's a clear violation of the Emoluments Clause. It is impeachable by itself without anything else. And we should not fear to say so. We should not fear to oppose this. It is against the essence of America, the essence of the Republic. We cannot let it stand. D, any comments?
My first comment when this all came out was taking something from a foreign power and just the fact of spying, what they may put in there.
Yes, well, of course, there will be a cleaning up of the plane. It will be carefully gone over for spying and things like that. Uh, so there is an issue here because they will have to go over the plane and just about take the whole thing apart to ensure that it is safe and non-secure, and that gift is going to cost the Republic many millions of dollars to make it suitable as as Air Force One. Uh, but
And
that's
also,
not the point. Okay, the point is this is just totally scandalous.
it is Russia. I know they offered it to Russia. Russia didn't want it, and it was just sitting there. So it wasn't like it was this.
Oh, so they offered it to Russia's face.
They offered it to Russia. It's something that they haven't been able to get rid of.
That's really interesting. They haven't been able to get rid of it.
Yes.
So Trump wants the leavings of Putin. Steve says shared on Facebook. Dawn Foster says she's lagging and can't share. Steve Wolfbrand says waiting for Shonda's birthday party. Who is Shonda? I mean, I know what a Shonda is, but
No, she's Chandra. She's been in the hospital with cancer. She was a person that had a show, an individual show like a podcast,
oh,
and obviously she hasn't been able to do that. She's been undergoing chemotherapy, for breast cancer, I believe, and as
that's
well for cancer. So, but she's doing better from what I understand.
oh, well, that's good. Bonnie went through that some years ago.
Hmm.
Yeah, it was not a good time. Robert Copeland says, I very rarely watch this live stream now as I disagree with a lot of Joe Firestone says now, or he speaks on topics that I am not interested in.
Well, it's good you're here anyway.
Real good to see you. Catherine Lewandowski says, but the Constitution is only a piece of paper. It has no strength without men and women, you might add, Catherine, who will
Hmm.
uphold it. I completely agree. And what we're trying to do by covering this, of course, is to uphold it. Kindly, no need to use his name. Just say he, him, and we will know you are referring to, and blame the executive branch. We should not be feeding his narcissistic ego disorder. Lana says, hi all, great to see you, Lana. I'm very glad you're here. Okay, let's go to the second of our topics for tonight.
Okay.
No enrichment, no deal. And I'll share that for you, D.
Okay.
So it's from UNS.
Okay. Quote, no enrichment means no deal. Trump uses unlawful demand as pretext for war on Iran.
And there's a picture of Trump aiming a pistol at somebody.
We have one very, very clear red line, and that is enrichment. We cannot allow even 1% of enrichment capability. Steve Witkoff, U.S. Special Envoy, ABC's This Week. Because that's what the administration is saying, that the neocons.
That's what the administration is saying. But I have to add, when they first began to negotiate with Iran, they did not say up front when they asked for meetings. They did not say one up front to begin with that this was a requirement of the negotiation.
No, they didn't.
In fact, what they said at first was the opposite, that it was not a requirement. And that was the condition under which the negotiations were accepted by Iran. So the United States has gone back on a basic condition of the negotiations.
I think because the neocons got involved.
Because Trump caved to the neocons.
Hmm.
Please go on.
Quote, demanding zero uranium enrichment means no deal. Sayed Abbas Araghchi, Iran's foreign minister. You could have spotted this from a mile away. President Trump, who sabotaged the most stringent and comprehensive nuclear agreement in history, the JCPOA, ordered his special envoy to make a surprise announcement, that crosses all of Iran's, quote, red lines and makes war between the U.S. and Iran inevitable. Anyone with half a brain could see that this was a strategy from the very beginning. Just as Washington encouraged Kyiv to intensify its bombardment of the Donbass, forcing Putin to send Russian forces into Ukraine, so too Washington lured Tehran into nuclear talks with the clear intention of creating a pretext for launching a war on Iran. In both cases, U.S. war planners moved heaven and earth to make it look like the opposite party provoked the conflict, when, in fact, Washington was the primary instigator. Let me explain. On Sunday, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff said the following on ABC's This Week. We have one one red line, and that is enrichment. We cannot allow even 1% of the enrichment capability. Full stop. Witkoff's comments require thorough and unbiased analysis, mainly because they are designed with one purpose in mind: to sabotage the nuclear talks. There's no other explanation. The Trump administration and anyone who has followed this issue over the last decade and a half knows that Iran's biggest and brightest red line is enrichment. In the 4 meetings that have been conducted in Oman since April, U.S. negotiators were told explicitly that nuclear enrichment was, quote, non-negotiable and off the table. In other words, they agreed that the issue would not be discussed or even brought up. Non-negotiable means non-negotiable. So we must assume that the reason Witkoff decided to make this unexpected announcement was either because he wanted to torpedo the negotiations or because he doesn't understand plain English. Which is it?
Okay, so this paragraph uh, 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 puzzles me somewhat. The Iranians did make clear that they weren't going to negotiate the enrichment question, but they also made clear they were willing to accept 3.67%, which was the same percent, okay, that was agreed to in the JCPOA, and that they were okay with that kind of constraint. Now, it was more ambiguous whether they were okay with the other constraint of not going past the 20% level for medical applications, okay, and for research. There was some talking there that okay, they would take their stock and give it to the Russians for safekeeping, and then when they needed something specific for research purposes or for medical applications, the Russians, would basically parcel out to them. There was some talk of that, in the press. Okay, but I think where the enrichment issue was not a negotiable issue, where it was a red line, okay, for the Iranians, was specifically with respect to zero. They would not accept zero as the criterion for enrichment. And all of a sudden, Witkoff tries to impose that after 4 meetings with them. Okay, please go on.
We think Woodcock understands plain English. In fact, we were sure of it. So, what was his motive? Why did he decide to deliver this bombshell on national TV to an American audience instead of Iranian negotiators who would have challenged him on the issue? Why? There can only be one reason. He wants to sabotage the talks. He wants to force the Iranians to terminate the meetings so it appears that they do not sincerely seek peace. This is how Trump and co. intend to turn the tables and make it look like Iran is the bad guy. More importantly, any suspension of the talks by Iran will be used as justification for U.S.-Israeli airstrikes on targets in Iran. Trump has already threatened that. If the talks broke down, he would unleash holy hell on Iran. Witkoff has now laid the groundwork for those attacks. Other analysts are starting to figure out what is going on behind the smokescreen of the nuclear talks. Here's how Michael Tracy sums it up. If anyone suspected that the purpose of this quote negotiating exercise was to set up an impossible endpoint, humiliating Iranian capitulation, and then when Iran balks, use that as a pretext to bomb Iran, we try to negotiate first. There is growing evidence for your suspicion. He's right. He's right, isn't he? The talks were a setup that was concocted to create a justification for war. It's clear as day. Much of the public's confusion on this matter is attributed to Witkoff himself, who seems like an affable and credible fellow whose position on nuclear enrichment is identical to rabid, quote, foam at the mouth warmongers like John Bolton and Mike Pompeo. Think about that for a minute. Witkoff's position is the same as Bolton and Pompeo's. There's no difference. So, why is nuclear enrichment such a big deal that Iran won't even discuss it? Because Iranians have great pride, and they will not allow themselves to be treated like second-class citizens by the likes of the US and Israel. That's why. Look, Iran's right to nuclear enrichment is not a privilege granted by executive fiat or presidential edict. It's a fundamental right that is enshrined in the international law under the terms of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. President Trump does not have the authority to forbid Iran from engaging in activities that are not only perfectly legal under NPT statutes, but also affirmed under the treaty's unalienable right clause. Inquisitive people might want to read the section of the treaty itself to corroborate what we are saying here. PT Article 4 and the right to nuclear technology. Paragraph 1. Quote, nothing in this treaty shall be interpreted as affecting the unalienable right of all the parties to the treaty to develop, research, production, and use of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes without discrimination, and in conformity with Articles 1 and 2 of this treaty. Part 2. Encourage cooperation in sharing nuclear technology for peaceful uses, particularly for developing countries. What part of the above statement is ambiguous? There is nothing ambiguous about this statement. Iran clearly has the unalienable right to develop research, production, and the use of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes without discrimination. That means that neither Trump nor anyone else can selectively order Iran to stop doing what is clearly permitted under an internationally recognized treaty. And we should also pay attention to the language that is used in the passage. The treaty does not simply refer to the rights of the participating parties, they refer to unalienable rights, which means that nuclear enrichment is a fundamental natural right that cannot be taken away or surrendered, either by a government or an individual.
Okay, so here I have to emphasize this treaty, the NPT treaty, was signed by all kinds of nations. Okay, it's a UN treaty. The United States is a signatory to it, and Iran, okay, is a signatory to it. So the United States, in its position in terms of the negotiation, uh, um, with Iran, is trying to get Iran to give up a right that it has, and which the United States has agreed to when it became a signatory to this particular treaty. Okay, please go on.
The wording was formulated to avoid the situation we have today, in which an impulsive and domineering despot arbitrarily repeals the laws and rights that don't align with his dubious political objectives. By refusing to comply with Trump's executive edict, Iran is basically defending the global system upon which international law rests. It is a rejection of Trump's iron-fisted unilateralism. We should all be grateful for Iran's gutsy perseverance. By the way, just to underscore Witkoff's hypocrisy on this matter, here's a short video on Fox News of Witkoff stating unequivocally that Iran would be permitted to enrich at 3.67%, which is a position he now rejects. The interview was conducted in April, a month before he banned all enrichment activities. And Witkoff confirms to Fox Trump is seeking to limit Iran's enrichment to 3.67%, just as the JCPOA did. Israel wanted Trump to blow up Iran's nuclear program, which would lead to war, Trump said. Trump said no. Trump correctly put U.S. interests ahead of Israel's on this issue. What conclusions can be drawn from this sudden about-face on the part of the administration that has put us all on a path to war? First of all, we can assume that the U.S.-Iran negotiations were set up to fail. In fact, the plan to create justification for war required that the talks fail. Second, we can assume that Trump, who presented himself as an opponent of foreign interventions and who promised, quote, to pursue a new era of peace, understanding, and goodwill, is following in the footsteps of his warmongering predecessors and has no intention of keeping his word to the American people. And third, we can assume that Trump is zeroing in on Iran in order to repay the wealthy billionaire Zionist who filled his campaign coffers with over 100 million. and helped him win the 2024 election. We never believed for a minute that the millions in campaign donations were given without, quote, strings attached. Bibi and his Zionist allies want the U.S. to spearhead a war on Iran, and Trump is the man who can deliver that war. All he needs is some type of credible justification for launching his preemptive attacks, which the failed negotiations will provide.
Here's a picture of Trump with an Israeli flag sweatshirt and pom poms. Okay, so that's it. Okay, I personally am not so sure that when these talks started, that they were set up specifically for the purpose to provide an excuse. It doesn't seem to me that Trump, goes through a lot of trouble to create um, uh, um, excuses. To me, it's more likely that what happened was that at first he was serious, concerning, the negotiations. Okay, and Witkoff therefore had free reign to offer the enrichment to Iran as part of the talks, and to say to the Iranians the United States would not make that uh, an issue, but that somewhere along the line, since there were weeks and 4 meetings between the United States, and Iran, somewhere along the line, the pressure from the Israeli lobby got to Trump,
Mm-hmm.
and Witkoff was forced to recently say what he did. Was ordered by the president, to say what he did, because Trump changed his mind, in midstream. I think that's what happened. Okay, so I don't accept this particular analysis. Okay, I do think, though, that there still may be a change. There's intelligence coming in all the time to the president about the capabilities of Iran.
Mm-hmm.
And these capabilities have increased even over the 4 weeks, of the negotiations. And it's significant that during the period of the negotiations, we also saw the defeat of the United States by the Houthis. So, I have to believe that Trump is going to be very wary when it comes to starting a war with Iran. Whatever Adelson would like him to do, she can pressure, she can scream, she can say all kinds of things to him, and other Zionists can also. But if he's persuaded by other people talking facts to him that a war with Iran is going to doom his presidency to failure, and that he won't be able to get all the things he plans to get out of it, I think Trump could still change his mind again. But we will have to see. Okay, I don't know. I think the scenario Mike is setting forth here, is a pretty likely one. I mean, I don't think it's a silly scenario, at all. Okay, my difference with it is based on intuition. Uh, so Mike could, very well be right in this construction. Anyway, I thought it was worth us talking about,
Mm-hmm.
so I included it, in this program. Okay, what do you think, Dee?
there's a part of me that really thinks he doesn't want to go to war with Iran. I kind of think in a way early on, when Witkoff came back and said they had, worked out an agreement, and the next thing they didn't, then it was that whole zero enrichment. There's there's this battle going on in the Trump administration between you know, the ones that don't want war and the ones that do want war.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a fight. I think the fight going on inside the administration is quite obvious.
Hmm.
And Trump can change, okay, from day to day. He's a big vacillator.
Yes.
He really is. Some people who served in his first administration, however briefly, know that he's a vacillator. And very often he does what the last person he talks to wants him to do.
Hmm.
So I don't think we know how this is going to turn out. Though a part of me finds the article by Mike to, be very plausible.
Oh, definitely, it's plausible. Um, but when you really look at it, the strength of the U.S., and our capabilities right now, I mean, we are weakened.
Yes. Catherine says, yes, okay, we can, um, say women, but they are stripping women, okay, of our rights. They are, including, of course, the Supreme Court. Evelina says, so Witkoff was addressing a U.S. audience, not Iran. Isn't that a nuance we should consider? It may not hurt the talks with Iran itself. I think such a public statement, which you then would have to withdraw from later, uh, is very inappropriate for talks such as this. If they were at this moment serious about concluding an agreement with the Iranians, it's the last thing that Witkoff should have said in public. The last thing he should have said.
Hmm.
I think he said it because Trump told him to say it. He may have told him to say it because he wanted to address a U.S. audience. But I don't see how Trump gains if later he wants to back away from that very definite statement. If he does back away from it later after such a public statement, he looks weak.
Hmm.
And he doesn't like to look weak. So I think the statement is a dangerous one. It comes close to torpedoing the talks. This coming week is a critical week for the talks. They may completely break down. Now, it will remain to be seen whether Trump actually follows any breakdown with an attack or decides to join with the Israelis uh, um, in attacking Iran. The Israelis, of course, have been said to be planning an attack on Iran once again. And they're supposedly very serious about that, regardless of what the U.S. wants. So we'll see if they go ahead, and we'll see if Trump is dragged into the war. But I don't think he wants to be dragged into the war. And I also think, as a matter of simply the military balance, I don't think the Israelis are going to be very successful in attacking Iran. I don't
No.
I don't think they're going to be successful uh, um, um, at all. Now, someone was saying today on one of the videos I saw that the rumor is that Israel will be doing commando raids in order to get into the nuclear facilities of, the Iranians.
That's terrible.
Uh,
They'd be prepared for that.
okay, according to Alistair Crook and Larry Johnson, who was saying they heard those kinds, of rumors. Uh, in their view, those rumors weren't really serious because it would be very, very difficult to get into Iran and conduct those raids, at the nuclear facilities that are widely dispersed. And I believe that's true. I think, it would be a futile gesture on the part of the Israelis.
Mhm.
And they have a lot more to sabotage, than simply to go in and try to get those sites. They're undoubtedly going to launch, an air attack. And then they'll have to contend with the air defense system of the Iranians. This past week, I noticed the Iranians had actually developed S-500 systems of their own, systems that were supposedly capable of knocking down hypersonic missiles, but certainly were capable uh, of knocking down any bombers that the United States would send against them, or any fighter bombers from the Israelis. Anyway, if those S-500s are distributed to any degree inside of Iran, I think that pretty much closes the possibility of a successful attack from the air, using planes. That doesn't forego the possibility of missile attacks, of course, perhaps based on, on submarines. But even those would be challenged by the S-500 systems the Iranians are said to have. So I think we're looking at a rough go for any attack on Iran, but that remains to be seen, of course.
Mhm.
Okay, so let's go on to the next of our topics. And that's covered, in this video that I'm sharing from the judge and Scott Ritter. And here they are. I'm not going to play the whole video, but I'm going to start about 18 minutes and 13 seconds in, if I've marked it correctly. If not, it's approximately on target. So we'll see.
I'm going to switch gears to the special military operation in Ukraine, and I'm going to ask you if the American negotiators understand the Russians. But before you answer that, here's Secretary of State Rubio yesterday. This will impact your answer, I think. Cut number 19, Chris.
On the issue of Ukraine, here's what we can all agree on. There is no military solution to this crisis.
Right.
It will have to end in a negotiated settlement. And the fundamental challenge we have in Ukraine is this. Russia wants what they do not currently have and are not entitled to, and Ukraine wants what they cannot regain militarily. And that's been the crux of the challenge.
I don't disagree with that at one level. But on the other hand, what Vladimir Putin is doing now is playing for time. And he's playing this president like a fiddle. And the longer he plays it, the more opportunity he has to gain territory in Ukraine, and the harder it's going to be to get him to the table.
But
What we need to do is to put pressure on Vladimir Putin in every way we can to ensure that we can get them to the negotiating table.
Well, I disagree.
The ex-president's battle with the overwhelming situation in his personal life isn't ruining his life as much as waking up 3
Disagree with this playing with a fiddle analogy, because the truth of the matter is when Vladimir Putin woke up this morning, he had the same set of sanctions on him that he's always had since the beginning of this conflict. And Ukraine was still getting armaments and shipments from us and from our allies. And the European Union is about to impose additional sanctions. And the U.S. is looking for no Patriot batteries to be able to transfer from other NATO nations into the Ukrainian hands. And what the president's trying to do is end a war. He's trying to end a bloody, costly war that neither side can win,
I
and
think
people
we
are
all
dying every
support.
single day.
But
And so, but this notion that I don't, what has Putin gained throughout this? He hasn't gotten a single concession. He hasn't gotten a
he's
single
gotten
sanction
time,
lifted.
and the more time he gets with that additional pressure on Russia, the more incentive he's got to
Well,
continue to
Yeah,
gain territory and continue to play for time.
So
So the question is, before we go further, Senator Shaheen assumes that we have cards to play with Russia, that we, the United States, can place pressure on Russia that will cause them to change their behavior, okay, and their plans. That's a big assumption. Let us go on.
when the Secretary of State says land to which they're not entitled, isn't he manifesting a fundamental ignorance of Russian history and an ignorance of the Russian mentality?
Marco Rubio is ignorant about everything Russian. He doesn't. He's not a smart man. I mean, I'm not calling him, stupid. He's clearly articulate. But his level of, whether it's willful or it's just ingrained in him, he's incapable of absorbing the Russian reality. He has built up a fantasy world that is populated by his anti-Russian ideology, and it blocks reality so that he sees things through a prism that creates this fantasy world. Russia is not entitled to. I'd just love to spend a couple minutes asking Rubio what is the intellectual foundation and legal foundation of that statement when it comes to entitlement. I'll just confront him right off the bat with, why did the United States recognize Israel's right to the Golan Heights and say that Israel could annex it? Israel has no historical right to it, but Israel conquered it. And so we say through the act of conquering, etc., Israel has a right to do this. Russia has a historical link to every piece of territory that it's occupied and is insisting on. It has always been part of Russia. Moreover, Russia is in the process of defeating a hostile enemy and conquering this territory, which would give Russia the same rights to this territory that Israel has. But Rubio doesn't want to go down that path.
Okay, so I, of course, agree with what Scott said. Only one small disagreement. That area was not always Russian. Its occupation by the Russians only dates from 1776, which, of course, was the same year as the creation of the United States. So it hasn't always been, but it's always been since the creation of the United States itself.
Other thing I would remind Rubio is just today, the Russians broke through the Dnepropetrovsk border, and they're now operating inside the territory of Dnepropetrovsk, one of the additional 4 oblasts that Russia said will be conquered by Russia if Ukraine doesn't come to the table. Well, it's too late, Ukraine. You've just now lost Dnepropetrovsk. And if you keep waiting, you'll lose Kharkov, you'll lose Mykolaiv, and you're going to lose Odessa. This is irreversible. I mean, again, Marco Rubio doesn't know what he's talking about. Russia is on a roll here. Every day they're breaking through. The Ukrainian military is on the cusp of total collapse. And in some ways, the senator that was questioning Rubio is right. Putin has.
This brilliant device keeps your home cool in summer, even during heat waves and power outages. It's smaller than a lunchbox, cools any room within
has time.
Okay, the senator in question, okay, is Senator Shaheen, one of the two New Hampshire senators.
He was always going to have time. I mean, I would just remind the senator, your sanctions haven't done a damn thing. When you first imposed your sanctions back in 2022, Russian economic growth was measured like 2.6%. Today, it's like 4.6, 4.8% and growing. Sanction them more. The Russians say, please sanction us, because every time you sanction us, our economy gets stronger. You know what India did today? They bought more oil, the most oil from Russia that they've ever bought, despite all the threats made by the United States. Why? Because we have no leverage here. I don't know what she thinks she's going to accomplish. Vladimir Putin said the Europeans are idiots for sanctioning us because the sanction package they put together will only hurt Europe. It will bounce off Russia like nothing. Russia is literally sanctions proofed. You can't do a damn thing to Russia. So what are they trying to do through sanctions? Putin isn't buying time. Putin owns the damn calendar. This war will operate on the pace set by the Russians. And right now, that pace is one that no one can match. We can't get enough weapons. Where are we going to get the ammunition? Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, got up and said, hey, Russia today is producing 4 times as much ammunition as we are. Their industry's fully mobilized. We can't do anything. We got nothing. Rubio acknowledged, we got nothing. What weapons are you sending, Marco, little Marco? I mean, this is a joke. These are people fooling themselves into believing that they are somehow relevant. The only relevance that the United States has is that Russia would like to have better relations with the United States to avoid a new Cold War and the threat of nuclear war that comes with it. So they are working with this. They're very smart. Putin had a nice conversation with Donald Trump. They talked, in first name basis, and they had nice words. And I don't think they lied to each other. But again, Donald Trump's not man enough to deal with Vladimir Putin. I'm just telling you straight up, he won't meet Putin until the conditions are right. Because if he goes in right now, he has no cards. He's going down with a man who has a royal flush already. And it'll be just like the last time he met Putin. If you remember, they were in, I believe, Helsinki, and they came out after their one-on-one meeting where Trump was all, I'm going to strong arm Putin. And Trump was a beaten little child, and Putin came out like the cock on the walk. I mean, boom, 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 boom. I'm in charge. I'm big. I'm strong. My head's up. My shoulders back. And Trump's all defeated. That's the reality when somebody who's not prepared for Vladimir Putin meets Vladimir Putin, because he's got his act together and he's backed by a country that has his act together, and he's supported by a foreign ministry that knows what the hell it's doing. Donald Trump has Marco Rubio, who doesn't know anything about Russia, and there's a whole host of other characters that don't have what it takes to tell the truth about Russia.
So, to summarize that in short, Jean Shaheen doesn't know that we have no cards. She is not sufficiently knowledgeable to know that. Maybe Marco Rubio knows that, though, even though he didn't say that. Maybe he has an inkling.
Let me tell you just how believable you are with our audience. Chris has been running a poll throughout the show. The question is, does Trump really understand Russia? About 1,500 people have responded. 87% no, and 12% yes. I don't know where the 12% are thinking. It's obvious he doesn't understand Russia, and what you said is patently true. You know the Russians. I spent a few hours with Sergei Lavrov. This is a different level of intellect than and knowledge of the other side than what we have here. Well, let's start with basics. Who is the Secretary of State? Is it the guy they swore in, or is it the guy that's doing all the negotiating?
Yeah, no, and Sergei Lavrov, is not only competent, but he's backed by one of the most competent teams imaginable. Everybody in the Russian foreign ministry is an honest to goodness expert who studies. It doesn't mean they're perfect. It doesn't mean they don't make mistakes, but collectively they are competent. The Russians have a term, it's adequate. When I first heard them use that, I'm like, That's not a very strong term. I mean, if someone said that I was adequate, I'm like, I don't want to be adequate. I want to be,
Adequate wouldn't get you promoted in the Marine Corps, would it?
No, but in Russia, adequate is like the ultimate compliment. You are adequate. That means you are competent, you do your job, everything is done properly. The Russians are adequate, and the Americans are the furthest thing from adequate, not in the right direction either. We're not competent. We don't understand Russia. This is what people need to understand. If you're going to deal with the Russians, you better understand them. You better know them. That way you can develop strategies that work. If you put all your effort into putting in, for instance, economic sanctions that then are your follow-on strategies are predicated on things the sanctions are supposed to accomplish and they never will accomplish, which means you're now left stumbling around because nothing's happening the way you wanted it to happen. And the Russians are sitting there going, thank you very much. We already planned for that. We've taken the countermeasures. I've told your audience before, and I've talked to you about the OODA loop, John Boyd's classic decision-making cycle, the observe, orient, decide, act. If you get inside somebody's OODA loop, you're inside their decision-making cycle, and you're going to win every single time. Well, Russia is deep inside our decision-making cycle. They are acting, we are reacting, they are controlling the pace of operations, they're controlling every aspect of this. We're trying to play catch up, and we are never going to be catching up. Today we think we're doing something that will affect this, but that they're already 4 months ahead of us. Tomorrow we're going to try and do something, but now they've accelerated to 6 months. They are getting so far ahead of us, they're going to have us lapped 26 times by the time this conflict is over. Marco Rubio, I promise you this, on the day the Russians get the Ukrainians to sit down and sign the unconditional surrender that they will sign because the Russians have destroyed them, Marco Rubio will still be looking for Patriot missiles somewhere in the world to send the Ukrainians.
Scott Ritter, there is nobody like you. Your intellect, your bravery, and your passion. Thank you so much, my dear friend. I wish I could bottle, or we will get a transcript of what you just said. It should be read all across the land. Thank you, thank you, thank you, my friend.
Well, thanks for having me on, and have a great week.
Oh, you.
Okay, any comments, Dee?
He was right on. It's right on. And this is our biggest problem. None of the administrations understand Russia or any country at that matter.
I know they don't understand the Iranians either. I don't even think they understand the Israelis very well.
No, they don't. They just take whatever they get sent
Yeah.
by Israel and just go with that. They don't go beyond that.
Anyway, we have a sad lack of competence, or adequacy in our foreign policy establishment. I think that's a big problem.
It is a huge problem.
The Earl of Earl says, "Hey guys," and then, "Hi Steve." And Robert Copeland says, "Scott Ritter has been saying the same thing for over a year." I don't think he said exactly this before, Robert. Some of the things he says he's been saying for over a year, sure. But that doesn't mean they're not true. We are seeing them come true right now. Steve Wolfbrand says, "Hi, Earl of Laurel." Earl says, at Robert Copeland, I know there's no constructive reason to say this, but Robert is kind of a shitty name, but it's not as bad. It's not as bad. Copeland? I'm not sure. Not sure I understand that particular comment, but we don't want to encourage any fights between our commentators here. Robert says building weapons increase the GDP, but it's not of benefit to the Russian people. Well, all the reports from people who have been visiting Russia, such as Larry Johnson, you know, and Ray McGovern, the judge, people who have recently been to Russia. Okay, the comments from Alexander Mercouris, who was recently there also. They all say that it's looking like very good times for the people of Leningrad and the people, of Moscow. That for people who have not been there for some time, what they're seeing now in both of those cities, is kind of amazing. So people who have had recent personal experience there are saying the Russians are doing very, very well. Earl says, sorry, I didn't like the earlier criticism that revealed nothing. It's okay to disagree or not be interested, but you got to say why, or the receiver just gets a put down. Okay, well, thank you, Earl. Okay, so let us go on then. Okay, you want to do the next one, Dee?
Okay. Okay.
That's a good one. It's by Pepe Escobar, so it's certainly very colorful.
Okay, I'm sure it is. Okay. European caucusocracy locked in a forever war against Russia. Pepe Escobar, May 23rd, 2025.
For those who don't know, caucusocracy is ruled by the worst.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it means. This is from Pepe. And here's a picture of the worst, specifically the people who currently are governing the European countries, the EU, or NATO. So there they all are.
Okay. So, the Eurocrats in Brussels have just adopted their 27th round of sanctions against Russia. The sky is the limit, targeting nearly 200 tanks of the so-called Russian Shadow Fleet. The package, endorsed by EU member states, includes proverbial scores of asset freezes and visa bans. The EU and UK combo is also scheming how to tighten the oil price cap on Russia to $50 a barrel, aiming to hurt Russia's energy revenue. Cue to a monster pipeline of laughter from the whole global south, especially India and China, as if they would impeach any vessels of the Shadow Fleet, or if OPEC Plus would care about a puny unilateral EUcrat oil price cap. To qualify EU actions as self-destructive anti-intellectualism is actually benign. The IQ of people at the top in Brussels is a dismembered worm level, exemplified by the Estonian batshit crazy chick in theory representing the foreign policy of 450 million EU citizens. Brussels has been reduced to a pathetic Estonian propaganda snake pit with a whiff of a British accent. The SVR has noted how there is a groundswell of despair in Brussels for the mistake of appointing the imbecile Estonian universally known for absolute incompetence and a cringing, quote, inability to build bridges with EU leaders. She has already been removed from EU strategic defense policy planning. Still, the sanctions package dementia will keep rolling on, redacted by careerists with fat salaries who only care about their own retirement goal package. The next, the 18th, is supposed to be the largest sanctions package in history, according to the Brussels rumor mill. Not only accusing Russia of multiples stances of hybrid war and alleged use of chemical weapons, when it's actually the neo-Nazis of Country 404 who resort to it.
For those who don't know, of course, the Country 404 is a term that's often used by Pepe for Ukraine.
Okay, but targeting several Russian defense sector companies, plus companies and intermediaries from third countries supplying sanctioned products to Russia. Add to it the German BlackRock chancellor actively lobbying for an EU ban on the Nord Stream pipeline, blocking any possibility of a US-Russian business cooperation, already signaled by Trump. This ban will be part of the 18th package. Q2 Grandmaster Sergei Lavrov, who recently felt the need to emphasize that political EU Euro trash banning the return of Nord Stream are, quote, either sick or suicidal. Stealing Russia blind. Good luck with that. On the Baltic front, there's more of course. In a Pirates of the Baltics register, that's the Singanet heavy ballistic sentry mission, which aims to block Russian maritime activity. France is on it, which implies a non-regional NATO member directly involved, unlike, for instance, Norway. The Russians are unfazed. A strong possibility is that they will escort Russian ships with multifunctional naval and aerial drones, fully equipped with reconnaissance and combat gear. Yet, on the Orwellian front, nothing beats the anti-Russian, quote, tribunal, announced on May 9th by EU foreign ministers in Lviv, together with Kyiv, to, quote, hold top representatives of the Russian leadership accountable. That involves 30 partner countries, including UK and Australia. The US is out. The scam was minutely deconstructed by Thomas Roper, who is now viciously demonized and censored by the EU, even though he is a journalist and EU citizen of German nationality. Yes, Brussels now sanctions its own citizens capable of critical thinking, to the point of freezing their assets and forbidding them to visit their home country. And this is just the beginning. The new EU Kangaroo Court will be set up by the Council of Europe and will issue judgments, even in absentia, via 15 judges elected for 9 years each. The whole thing costing the EU bureaucracy around €1 billion. Needless to add that this kangaroo court has absolutely no basis in international law, as it's not approved by the UN. Instead, it's a private club of the fragmented West. Follow the money to understand the rationale. Few people today remember that last year the European Commission EU gave a 50 billion loan to Kyiv. Actually 35 billion by the EU and 15 billion by the G7. The problem is only Brussels is responsible for repaying this joint EU G7 loan. And the loan is supposed to be paid from the annual revenues generated by Russian assets frozen, i.e. stolen, in the EU, which Brussels refuses to release before the next 45 days.
No, 45 years.
Oh, 45 years.
Very important.
Yeah. Yeah, right, 45 years. These are all official EU decisions enshrined in Regulation 2024-277. Translation: No, I repeat, no European mainstream media has informed tax-paying citizens across the Union that the EU has formally decided to be at war with Russia for at least the next 45 years. That's crazy.
That is crazy.
Brussels has done everything trying to steal for good the confiscated Russian assets. The problem is that the EC Eurocrats have not found a mechanism to bypass international law. Enter the court. The EU bureaucracy will force the Kangaroo Tribunal to blame Russia for everything related to the war, and the SMO sentence Russian government members to long-term prison sentences in absentia, and then decide that Russia has to pay reparations. Endgame, the Kangaroo Court decides to steal for good the frozen Russian assets. Once again, under international law, this is a robbery. Key inevitable consequences. No one across the global south will trust the euro and European financial centers anymore. This Russian demonization, euro dementia scenario is in play just as Trump 2.0 still bets on some sort of normalization with Russia via a solution for Ukraine. Yet the key factor here is the cowardly collective fear of the EU kakistocracy. If they don't rob Russia blind, they have no means to repay that fateful 50 billion loan to the Kiev goons. That should be the main fact explaining why this collection of political mutts needs badly to non-stop escalate what is a de facto forever war against Russia. So, expect only dementia coming from Brussels in the foreseeable future, like the brilliant idea of setting up a single military bank to allocate for weapons production, a replica of the World Bank with the headquarters in London, since they could not find 120 billion euros to come up with a single European military fund. The German economy, for instance, continues to collapse. Their plan B is this bank. For all that cornucopia of sound and fury, Russia remains, once again, unfazed. Putin top aide and former National Security Advisor Nikolai Yoda Patrushev has noted how NATO has been, quote, conducting exercises at our borders at a scale unseen in decades. They are training for conducting a broad offensive from Vilnius to Odessa, seizing Kaliningrad region, imposing a naval blockade in the Baltic and the Black Seas, and executing preventive strikes on the staging locations of Russian nuclear deterrence forces. Good luck with that. Good luck with the military bank, and good luck with stealing Russia blind with no blowback.
So what Pepe is telling us here is to expect a long war between the EU and Russia.
Yeah,
Okay, because as long as they insist on stealing, what is it, 300 million in Russian funds,
hmm
there will be no real peace between the EU and and Russia.
no,
And the EU stands in very strong need, okay, of Russian gas. They have to open up again the pipeline, but they insist on keeping it closed. And they also continue to tell the fable that the closing of gas coming through the pipelines was due to Russia. When, of course, by now everybody knows it was due to the United States actually sabotaging the pipeline, the Nord Stream pipeline. So there we go. we have a ridiculous situation as long as the group of leaders pictured at the beginning of the post, okay, at this blog, still are, are running Europe. Now, there's every reason to believe that things will be changing soon. Certainly, Macron is probably not long for this world.
Mm-hmm.
Keir Starmer seems like a very short-term individual.
Definitely.
And ever since he's taken over, he hasn't done anything except to get the British public angry at him. And then, of course, there's Mr. Zelensky, okay, in the middle, who will be lucky if he lasts another month without completely running away. And there is Merz, the new chancellor, okay, of Germany, who is the BlackRock guy, okay, as well. I don't know how long he's going to be the chancellor, okay, of Germany, but there seem to be political changes going on there. And I don't think it's wise to forecast a long tenure for him. Those are pretty much the leaders of Europe, except, for Ursula von der Leyen, who is, of course, there, and who is bucking to become, I think, the permanent leader, okay, of Europe. But I really don't think that's going to happen. Because I think ultimately the nations of Europe will take back the authority they've given to the EU, simply because the EU is not at all in touch with the populations of Europe and the populations of the nations of Europe. So, anyway, the outlook for Europe doesn't look very good, okay, right now. And with Trump and the Europeans beginning to fight over the tariffs, okay, it looks even worse. I think this week, I believe that Trump was promising tariffs of 25%, for the Europeans, which will make their products unsaleable here and won't work. So there is that. Robert said, I noticed one thing about this live stream, and that it is not growing hardly at all. No, we're not doing too badly. Right now, we've got 56 people. Earl of Laurel says that. Robert Copeland, is that you, Ignatius T? I'm sorry, who is Ignatius T? I missed the reference, but it sounds funny. So I note that. I will move on to the next piece we have. That is also from Pepe Escobar, who's one of our favorite writers, of course.
Yes.
The title of this piece is From the Caspian to the Persian Gulf, tracking Iran's north-south corridor. And he posted this on May 21st, 2025, okay, at UNS. And there is a photo of what? I don't know. There's no caption to it. But the article starts off, on the road in Iran, the International North-South Transportation Corridor, the INSTC, International North-South transportation corridor, is one of the most crucial geoeconomic infrastructure projects of the 21st century. It unites at its core three BRICS nations, Russia, Iran, and India, branching out to the Caucasus and Central Asia. When fully operational, the INSTC will offer a full trade connectivity corridor, sanctions-free, cheaper and faster than the Suez Canal to a great deal of Eurasia. The geoeconomic consequences will be staggering. To revisit Iran in these times of geopolitical trouble, relentless, quote, maximum pressure, unquote, red lines on uranium enrichment and bombing threats could not be more pressing and more pressing, and enlightening. Total connectivity, highway, mosque, bazaar. By an auspicious turn of events, the old school reportage / investigation actually became the plotline of a documentary produced in Iran, shot by an outstanding crew, and to be broadcast in several parts of Eurasia, including Russia. Here we offer the broad strokes of our travel to the heart of the INSTC. We started with a series of interviews in Tehran with Central Asia analysts, and most of all, Mustafa Agam, top expert of Behina, Tarabar, Azar, the transportation and logistics firm specialized in Eurasia railway corridors. These analyses offered contrasting point of views on where the INSTC should go next and what are its main challenges. Travel along Iran's main artery from Tehran to Bandar Abbas was a must, as it will conform the Trans-Iran north to south highway access of the corridor. That doubles, of course, as a cultural and spiritual pilgrimage, which in our case featured plenty of auspicious overtones. We arrived at fabled Isfahan past sunset. Perhaps that was a picture of Isfahan at the top of this column, which allowed us to visit the Masjid-e-Shah, or quote unquote royal mosque, virtually undisturbed. The Royal Mosque, one of the highlights of Islamic architecture, sits on the south side of the Naksh-e Square in Isfahan, one of the most extraordinary public squares in the history of art and architecture, rivaling and arguably surpassing San Marco in Venice. A visit to the Isfahan Bazaar is also inevitable. I was looking for an old friend who sold nomad carpets. In the end, because of slow business, he relocated to Portugal, just to find his sort of air, young, energetic, who, apart from pointing me to a spectacular rare tribal rug from northeast Iran, close to the Afghan border, gave me a crash course on the effect of sanctions and the perpetual demonization of Iran um, in the West. Turkey, quote, Turkey has 40 million tourists. We have 2 or 3, unquote. Isfahan's neat and extremely organized uh, uh, bazaar offers quality handcrafts to rival Istanbul, but there's essentially domestic tourism sprinkled with a few foreigners, mostly from Central and South Asia and some from China. On the way back to Tehran, we learned that being a Tuesday, the revered haram of Fatima Masama, the daughter of the seventh, the seventh Imam Musa, in Qom, was open all night. Nothing prepares the pilgrim for an arrival at nearly 2 in the morning to an apotheosis of gold and crystals in the heart of Qom, Iran's second most sacred city after Mashhad. Only a few pilgrims paying their respects, some strolling around the shrine with their families or reading the Quran. A moment of quiet illumination. Thank you. Afterwards, it was time to hit the Caspian and the port of Bandar Anzali, the proverbial, quote, international bridge, where in theory, cargo ships from Astrakhan and the Russian Caspian, as well as other Caspian bordering states, will start arriving en masse via the INSTC. In Bandar Azali, Iran essentially imports petrochemicals, construction materials, also minerals and iron products, and exports grains, soybeans, corn, barley, wheat, and crude oil. In Tehran, Mustafa Agam, the connectivity expert, had explained in detail that perhaps the multimodal drive of the INSTC across the Caspian may not be the best idea. The Russians prefer to build a railway bordering the western margins of the Caspian, and another possibility is to use a network of already functioning railways from south-central Russia across Kazakhstan all the way to Aktau by the Caspian, and then connecting across Turkmenistan to Tehran. It's only via a close-up on Bandar Anzali that one understands of the rationale of the Russians. One of our cameramen in delightful broken English coined an instant hit, quote, port no exist, unquote, translation. The infrastructure has not been upgraded in decades, which brings us to the devastating effects of sanctions visible in the several nodes of Iran. China will have a lot of work to do as part of their 20-year strategic partnership, where energy for infrastructure is a central plank. The next section is break to the border. Bandar Abbas and the Persian italics mine Gulf is a completely different story. That's Iran's main port, and a keynote of the INSTC to be connected to Mumbai and already connected to the big ports in eastern China. We had all the hard to get necessary permits to explore Shahed Rajai, special economic zone, crammed with containers from shipping firms such as West Asia Express, and only unloading scores of Chinese container cargoes. The uber strategic Strait of Hormuz is only 39 kilometers to the south. A few days after our visit, the Iranian president uh, um, 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 uh, uh, um, the Masoud Pezeshkian went straight to the point, referring to proverbial Trump threats. Quote, block our oil and we'll block the energy of the world, unquote. Iran can do it in a flash. With that to happen, the collapse of the global economy is guaranteed. Further, port authorities explained that the recent explosion in Shahed Rajai attributed to negligence, quote unquote, still under investigation and somewhat mired in controversy, was not in the port itself, but in the storage area 10 kilometers away. From the Persian Gulf, we fly to the Sea of Oman, and infrastructure problems ride again. There are only 2 flights a week. We arrive at a minuscule military airport outside the future superstar of the INSTC, the port of Chabahar in Sistan, Baluchistan province. Baluchis are exceedingly cool, cousins to the ones on the other side of the border in Pakistan. In bustling Chabahar, the lineaments of a boom town are quite visible. A long walk in the port, side by side, with Ali Reza Jahan, a logistics expert, and a conversation with um, 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 uh, um, um, uh, uh, Saeed Arabi. I'm sorry, it's Arbabi. The chairman of the board and managing director of the Chabahar Free Trade Zone, could not be more um, um, enlightening. Jahan explains how Chabahar is essential to Iran's East Axis, serving over 20 million people, not only in huge Sistan, Baluchistan, but also 3 other Khorasan provinces, and further on to Kerman. So Chabahar is the port for an enormous hinterland, while its competitor, Gwadar in the Arabian Sea in Pakistan,
Colby.
only 80 kilometers away or so, is virtually isolated. Jahan also explains Indian investment. Tehran is investing heavily in the infrastructure and superstructure of Chabahar port, while India is investing in equipment. The Italian cranes around the port came from India. Arbabi at the Free Trade Zone expands on the international profile of Chabahar, which will be an absolutely key node not only for landlocked Afghanistan, but also the Central Asian stands, quote unquote. That brings us to the local highway saga. Chabahar to Zahedan in the Afghan border, 632 kilometers already, and quote, acceptable road, unquote, and with companion railway to be built in the next 3 years. Everything 100% financed by the Iranian government. Progress at the port is steady, slowly but surely. For the moment, Chabahar receives 3 ships from India a month, and 2 ships from China, plus 3 from the Persian Gulf. The distance uh, uh, from Mumbai is only 4 days, and from Shanghai, 15 days. The potential for expansion is limitless. From Chabahar, it's on the road bliss along the spectacular strategic oil-drenched semi-desert of the Makran coast, bordering the immaculate Sea of Oman all the way to the Arabian Sea. History looms large. This is where Alexander the Great lost as much as 75% of his army to dehydration and starvation when he was retreating across the desert to Macedonia after his tortuous 2-year invasion of India. Due to a concert of economic and ecological reasons, there have been plans for quite a while to relocate the capital, Tehran, to the Makran coast. Chabahar, in this case, would be the ideal candidate. Free port, INSTC connectivity between Central Asia and the Indian Ocean. India, which needs to step up its geo-economic game, has noticed it. And China certainly did. Chinese companies are bound to invest massively in Chabahar, the de facto key node for integration of the southern part, of Eurasia. That was an absolutely informative piece of work, full of facts and perspectives, and opinions. And I don't know where else one can get an article like this, except from Pepe Escobar. He's absolutely amazing. And his writing is so infused with his travels and the experiences that he has. But you can learn things from him that you can't learn from anyone else. I mean, he is simply amazing. He travels all over the world. And he gives you insights that you can't get anywhere else. Dee, any comments?
Like I said, it's very good. He really brings the facts out, and he has a good way of explaining it.
Yes, he does. And he's great at coming up with connections in order to put together a trade route.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so a comment from Evelina. EU's long war with Russia. Does the EU even have that long? They seem close, to dissolution.
Yeah.
Not only that, but the EU, is not a political unity. It's a unity of economic organization. So how can they have a war with Russia? They don't have the political structure to fund the war. So if there's going to be a war for 45 years, it has to go through the successor to NATO, because I don't think the United States is going to be in NATO for much longer. So the Europeans would have to come together into NATO, which would then be the military arm of the EU. But the EU is never going to come together in a political union that could field the military. There are too many nations inside of the EU now, and the regional differences among those nations are very, very great. Certainly the gulf between the West European nations and the East European nations, and the ambitions of those nations, the history of those nations, it's all very, very great. And I don't see the nations of Europe coming together in that kind of a fashion. Yet here's the EU planning on possessing the Russian, $300 billion for 45 years. That doesn't make any sense to me. That's ridiculous. Even Evelina adds that Ursula von der Leyen is being investigated for leaked emails. I think regarding business dealings with Pfizer. I gathered that's the drug company from the United States. Evelyn says, funny business which surely would put her out of commission. Let us hope. Hope so. And Mr. Wonderful has arrived at 10:45 and says, hello, everyone. The stream got my attention. And he says the theft of Russia's money is theft. Yes, I entirely agree. It's entirely in contradiction, to international law. I don't think that's going to stand. I'm afraid I think that Russia is going to take its money back in blood. So I don't think it was wise to seize that particular money. Let's go on to our next piece,
Okay.
because we still have two substantial pieces to go.
Okay.
The next one is the secret sauce of Chinese industrial success. Okay, that's another piece from the UN's review. It's relatively short, but I think particularly enlightening. So please go ahead, Dee, take it away.
Okay. The secret sauce of Chinese industrial success. Smart state planning plus ferocious market competition by Hu Ben, May 22nd, 2025. How the Chinese economy works. In a standard Western economic textbook, state planning and market competition are mutually exclusive. Thatcher and Reagan brought Western capitalism into the neoliberal phase by claiming, quote, government is not the answer, government is the problem, putting market fundamentalism on the altar. On the other side, Soviet central planning proved rigid and wasteful, leading to the eventual collapse of the USSR. Observing and learning from others' development path, China went through three distinct economic models, in the past 70 plus years.
Yeah.
1949 to 1978, emulation of Soviet central planning phase, which provided the country a heavy industrial foundation, but failed to deliver an adequate standard of living. 78 to 2012, freewheeling laissez-faire full-on capitalist phase, which saw rapid economic growth, rising standards of living, but also wealth disparity, environmental degradation, and low value added industrialization. 2012 to now, mixed state planning and market competition phase, which is featured by state-led industrial upgrade programs, intense market-based competition, rapid improvement in industrial sophistication, and hopefully rise above middle income trap to become the leading industrial powerhouse. The current model is antithetical to Western mainstream economic theories, but has led to a clear success stories like the Made in China 2025 program. I thought it would be interesting to discuss the features of the unique China model and the implications. The two parts of this model, state planning and market competition, form an integrated approach to national economic development. State planning incorporates three elements: identify key industries to focus, set concrete and tangible targets, align policy support. The planning function is carried out by China's State Planning and Development Commission, which assembles the best minds in the government, academia, think tanks, and industries, and goes through multi-year research, studies, and surveys to understand and predict key technological trends and future market demand. Then they iterate and socialize the plans until there is broad buy-in. Once top-line state planning priorities are set, central government empowers local governments to implement the policies. At the implementation level, fierce market competition becomes the norm. Local governments compete with each other. Each local government is powerfully incentivized to create local tech and industrial champions, as career advancements are typically tied in with achievements of national priorities. Local governments will unleash suites of policy support measures to attract and help businesses succeed, including preferential tax, land use priority, preferential bank loans, even venture capital financing from government agencies, e.g., Shanghai and Shenzhen each has multi-billion-dollar semiconductor funds. Other policy support even extends to establish educational programs at universities to train and develop scientific and technical talents specifically for identified industries and technologies, e.g., AI, robotics, hypersonics, rare earth mining and refining, rail, shipbuilding, etc. Roll out talent acquisition programs to provide housing, allowances, and compensation equalization schemes to attract talents to move to their cities. Some governments even provide WeWork type of office facilities to startups for free. Invest in infrastructure upgrades, including 5G coverage, EV charging stations, high-speed rail, ports, bridges, etc., to enable smooth operation of large industrial enterprises. Invest in local parts and component supply chains that can be plugged into specific manufacturing sectors. Promote successful technological leaders and executives in critical industries into senior government positions, e.g., the head of AVIC, the leading aeronautic business in China, was promoted to become a provincial governor. The central government went so far as to crack down on monopolistic consumer tech companies such as Alibaba and Tencent in 2019, as these companies were consuming too much financial and talent resources and preventing startups from emerging. The main goal of the crackdown is to redirect resources, funding talent to more productive directions such as AI and hard tech. As a result, in the key technological industrial hubs across China, from Shanghai, Shenzhen, Wuhan, Chengdu to Hefei and Shanxi, you will find hundreds of EV companies, solar energy companies, AI and robotic startups, shipbuilders, and drone companies that are developing innovative technologies, building production capacity, and engage in intense competition for consumers. In the competition, there are private businesses, state-owned enterprises, and foreign companies as well. All have to compete for customers on price and quality and operate with razor-thin margin. Innovation and cost efficiency are prized in the never-ending loop of hyper-competition. The Chinese industrial and technological ecosystem is often described by insiders as, quote, arena for gladiators, and the survival of the fittest environment. The winners of such competition emerge as world-class champions. The same model is replicated in industry after industry, from EV, smartphones, solar energy, robotics, shipbuilding, AI, large language models, drones, chip making, and biopharmaceuticals. Many people mistakenly assume the Chinese state planning model means the
Sorry,
okay,
I screwed up there.
okay,
Let me get it back for you.
okay,
Okay, there.
okay. Yes, many people mistakenly assume the Chinese state planning model means the government picks the winners and losers. That cannot be further from the truth. State planners pick the priority industries, define the swim lane, provide policy incentives, and then market takes over to decide the winner. In contrast, the U.S. industrial policy is more guilty of government picking winners. Just witness how both Biden and Trump surround themselves with senior executives of incumbent tech giants when they announce policies such as the CHIP Act, Inflation Reduction Act, or the Stargate program. Almost by definition, the main beneficiaries of these industrial policies will be the companies in the room. Market competition doesn't seem to play the same decisive role as China. As China accelerates the third mixed economy phase of its industrial development, we can expect to see more Chinese companies will innovate faster, scale in the largest single market in the world, and become world-class competitors in their industries. Profit margins will be kept low as competition will never rest. However, more consumer surplus will accrue to customers, leading to improvement of living standards for all.
I found this article to be, just extremely illuminating from the standpoint of where is the communism in this? Of course, we still refer to China, okay, as communist, and their model, is a communist model.
Hmm.
People in this country think of it as communist. But where is the communism in this? Okay, I don't see Marx and Lenin and Mao
No,
in this. I mean, well, I do see state planning, but I don't consider state planning to be particularly Marxist. During the 19th century, okay, in the American system, there was a lot of interaction between the private sector and government, and a definite amount of planning on how the United States was going to develop. It was part of the American system, the Hamiltonian system. It was originated by Hamilton. It was never thought of as a communist system.
no,
Okay, now of course, the Chinese system of state planning is much more comprehensive, but that doesn't make it, a communist system by virtue, okay, of that. Okay, the striking thing to me is that the planning part of it is where there ought to be planning, defining the boundaries of the economic system and defining the direction that the economic system ought to develop. But then self-organization and market competition, okay, are relied on heavily in order to determine the winners, okay, and losers. And it seems that the reliance on market forces in China is much greater than the reliance on, market forces here in the United States. Because here in the United States, what we've allowed for a long time is the undermining of the markets, by oligopolies, and by monopolies, virtual monopolies. And we don't regulate the economic system to, break those up. When Rabin is writing about that here, and he talks about specifically how, let's get to that part of the article. He talks about, in contrast, the U.S. industrial policy is more guilty of government picking winners. Just witness how both Biden and Trump surround themselves with senior executives of incumbent tech giants when they announce policies such as the CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, or the Stargate program. The main beneficiaries of these industrial policies will be the companies in the room. So we are not relying on market competition to choose the winners. What's happening is the politicians are choosing the winners. And to be frank about it, we know very well that the politicians choose the winners in very large part based on the contributions those winners make to political campaigns. So the market competition then is much more limited here in this country, which is supposed to be ideologically committed to the market, but in reality is undermining the market every which way. Whereas in China, they seem to be relying on market competition where it's appropriate to have market competition, and on planning where it's appropriate, to have planning, and where it's appropriate to set the boundaries for market competition. Now, what principles do they use to set the boundaries for market competition? As far as I can see, the principles they use are their conceptions, their conceptions of the public interest. They have goals which are to develop China and make it prosperous and make it strong. And those goals set what might be called the public purpose, of China. And they develop the plans around their notions of what the public purpose is. As far as we can tell, there is little role of bribery in this particular process or corruption in this particular process. The leaders of China seem devoted to doing what they think is best for China. And they plan based on that kind of conception. And there's nothing necessarily communistic about this. Then when they set, and they consciously set, boundaries for competition in each industrial sphere, that's important, to the planners. And the central and local governments then provide the financial infrastructure and the other kind of infrastructure that are necessary to allow the new businesses to compete with one another. And they use the intense competition in order to produce what can only be described as benefits for consumers, and benefits for the people. Now, this is not a communist system. This is a mixed form of economy. And I have to say that I think we could introduce a system like this here in the United States really relatively simply. if we were serious about the idea of the public purpose, and we define essentially what the dimensions of the public purpose actually were, and then we addressed the question of how various aspects of public purpose could be served by economic forces, okay, and market forces, we could develop goals for planning and ideas about what kind of budgetary support to give to the various planning sectors we set forth. And then we could rely on self-organization, okay, and new businesses, to define competitive arenas that would do exactly the same thing that they're doing in China. This would not involve any communist ideology or Marxism, okay, or anything like that. It would be completely consistent, with American values, which would be defined by our overall conceptualization of the public purpose. We could make the definition of the public purpose a process which could be structured as a bottom-up sort of process that voters would contribute to. That would be different from the system in China, but they do have a lot of bottom-up elements, okay, in that system, where the local governments and local communities have a voice in setting the overall priorities of the state. We could have the same thing here, okay, in this country, and we could still have the fierce sort of market competition that we are looking for in order to hold down the overheads of companies and the profits, okay, of companies, so as to benefit consumers. So my basic point here is that we could set up a system. I should not even say it's a system that's necessarily the Chinese system. It's more like a reinvention of the Hamiltonian system that we used here in this country to begin to develop very successfully during the 19th century, before we had the development of these, large firms that were dominating the market and undermining it. We would be able to develop it in a very American way, and according to our values. But we would have planning, also direction, according to clear visions of the public purpose, and we could set it up in such a way that, like the Chinese system, it would be resistant to corruption and to domination by individual, okay, and large sorts of firms. I think it's somewhere here points out that when some of the large firms in China were dominating the markets too much, the central government redirected things in 2019 by clamping down on the large firms and by redirecting their efforts. And I think that's interesting because it means that the central government is leading the large firms rather than the large firms actually leading the central government. Here, the passage that's relevant says, the central government went so far as to crack down on monopolistic consumer tech companies such as Alibaba and Tencent in 2019, as these companies were consuming too much financial and talent resources and preventing startups, uh, um, from coming up. Uh, uh, the main goal of the crackdown was to redirect resources, funding, and talent uh, to more productive directions such as AI and hard tech. And we see the results right now in 2025. All the advances the Chinese have made across China
Mm-hmm.
in EVs, in solar energies, in AI and robotics startups, shipbuilders, and drone companies, as is said in this article, that comes from the central planners ensuring that all the resources in the system are not taken up by the oligarchical firms. We need that here in the United States, and we're not getting it. So we're not seeing the emergence of the small businesses in these new areas, as we should. And the Chinese are getting far ahead of us as a result when it comes to development. This is not consistent with the public purpose of the United States. It's an undermining, of the public purpose. And it's led to an undermining of the political system, as we've seen now. So we can take a lesson from the Chinese, not from the communism, of the Chinese, but from the model of relying on central planning where that is important and relying on the market where that is essential to make sure that the companies that emerge, as the leaders have earned their place through market competition that is fair and that is not biased in any particular direction. It seems that China has found a blend of the proper role of planning in the central government and the proper role of capitalism inside, of their society. And this mixed economy is not particularly communistic. It's much more like the original Hamiltonian model that guided the United States through some of the 19th century. So I thought that article was very important. Okay. Any comments, Dee? Anything you want to add about that?
No, I have nothing more to add.
Okay, so we've got some other comments that have come in. I see John B. has joined. Okay, Evelina said at 10:47 that the theft of Russia's money was piracy, downright piracy. It
Mhm.
was taking what they had no basis for taking Russia's money. They just froze it. You might remember, Joe, I said in jest that Trump would cut the funding of the courts if they challenged his authority. Well, it has eventuated. No, it hasn't eventuated yet. What has happened is that that provision, quote, No court of the United States may use appropriated funds to enforce a contempt citation for failure to comply with an injunction or temporary restraining order if no security was given when. Yes, I know about that particular provision in the law. It has passed the House, but I don't think it's going to pass the Senate. I think there's enough opposition to this bill in the Senate, and enough opposition that has arisen to the dictatorship that Trump is trying to impose, that I don't think that this big, beautiful bill, or big, ugly bill, depending on your perspective, is going to pass. And I also don't think that the provision that you're quoting from here, John B., is going to get through the Senate. I don't think that's going to happen, because I don't think the senators collectively are foolish enough to want to give the president that kind of authority. I don't think so. We're already seeing great opposition to the bill in the Senate
Mhm.
from Senator Hawley, from Rand Paul, from Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski. Those four are enough to defeat this alone. But there are more. It's likely Mitch McConnell, is going to oppose this bill. It's likely Tom Tillis is going to oppose this bill. I think, of course, all the Democrats are going to oppose this bill. I've already named 6 of the Republican senators who are going to oppose the bill. Have I mentioned Senator McConnell yet? I mean, I don't think, after working so hard to get a court that he liked in power, I don't think Senator McConnell is going to support the emasculation of that particular court, the right-wing court.
Mhm.
That provision in the bill makes the judicial system a dead letter in the area of controlling the executive. I don't think for a minute that Mitch McConnell built this particular court in order to see that happen. He certainly didn't do it because he had any love for Donald Trump. He doesn't. And so he will be another senator to oppose this.
Mhm.
And I think there are other Republican senators who may also come to the fore. There may end up being 10 or 15 of them. But certainly I think there are going to be 7 or 8 who will be opposed to this bill. So I don't think it's going to pass the Senate. Now, they may put in another bill. I think they will probably rewrite the reconciliation bill. Then it will have to go back to the House. But when it's rewritten, I expect the Medicaid cuts are going to be far, far smaller. I suspect there will be no Medicare cuts in it or implied by it. I suspect the SNAP cuts are going to be far smaller. And I think the provision you're quoting will be completely eliminated from the bill. Because I think the senators are seeing the efforts of the Supreme Court to safeguard due process here in the United States are absolutely essential to prevent Trump from going too far. I think they're living through this now, and that this is changing the dynamic, okay, inside the Senate. I think it would have changed also the dynamic inside the House, except that Speaker Johnson, very wisely from a MAGA point of view, put this bill together hastily and then rammed it through in a situation where people didn't have too much time to think it through. And then at the last minute, Trump descended on the House and he battered people. I think the second time around, though, if you get a bill that's passed by the Senate, it will be far less extreme in terms of the cuts, the various cuts. But I don't even know if a big, beautiful bill is going to survive. I think we might see a series of smaller bills that are coming out of the Senate. And I just don't know if they're going to be able to, pass any bill at all, because once they start changing the big, beautiful bill, it's going to lose support up in the House. And it had only a one vote margin. It can't afford to lose any support.
No.
If there are 3 defections, it tanks the bill. So, okay, I just don't think the big and beautiful bill is going to pass. And I certainly don't think uh, 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 this one provision, which is going to paralyze the courts, I don't think that's going to survive. I don't think Trump has the support he needs, okay, to do that. And that's especially true because of the very serious failures of almost all of his policies thus far. I mean, they've all been a catastrophe. And I think probably the people in Congress want to have the support of the courts in helping to constrain Trump from doing the terrible things that he is doing. Mr. Wonderful says, I will say this, all battery operated vehicles, not a good idea. Koenigsegg Engineering is an example of innovative engineering that proves automotive engineering is not the problem. Okay, it's innovation. Yeah, I know Koenigsegg is an example, of innovative engineering related to the internal combustion engine, to further develop the internal combustion engine and make it, much more environmentally friendly. So I think there are other innovations that are emerging from Toyota, for example, where a standard kind of EV technology is not used, or is moderated. So I think we're going to see some changes in this. Okay, by the way, our attendance is growing to some 64. But let us move on and get to our final article, which is a second one about here's why China is beating the pants off the United States. Okay, I guess it's my turn for this one, right? So, okay, this is by Mike Whitney on May 22nd, just a couple of days ago. Fairly long one. Here's a picture of Donald Trump with a very sad look on his face, and all the chips in what appears to be a poker game sitting on Xi Jinping's side of the table. A mountain of chips, and no chips on Trump's side. Our single biggest priority is to improve the lives of the ordinary people. This is a quote from Xi Jinping, the president of China. And Mike says, Mike Whitney, polling data clearly shows that Americans prefer capitalism over socialism. In fact, it's not even close. A 2021 Gallup survey found that 60% of Americans view capitalism positively, while only 38% felt the same about socialism. The 2025 poll from the Rasmussen Heartland organizations reported an even bigger disparity, with an impressive 71% saying they prefer free market economics over socialism, which garnered a meager 12% support. The clear implication of these surveys is that Americans overwhelmingly support capitalism over a system of government in which the state exerts greater control over key industries and the distribution of wealth. There is, however, reason to believe that these surveys do not provide an accurate picture of the way people actually feel. If, for example, we check the results of other surveys, we find that attitudes towards the two systems are more ambivalent than we might think. What pollsters in America have found is that regardless of which party is in power, the vast majority of the people don't feel represented and don't think the issues, quote, that they care about, unquote, are addressed.
Mhm.
2025, for example, a majority of Americans believe the country is headed in the wrong direction. A Reuters Ipsos survey, April 25, 2025, found that fewer than 1 in 3 Americans believe the country is headed in the right direction, with a majority expressing concern about the economy, tariffs, and political extremism. Morning Consult's daily tracking, May 12, 2025, reported 56% of U.S. adults saying the country is on the wrong track. December 2024, December 24 Ipsos poll showed 69% of independents, 59% of Republicans, 78% of Democrats believe the country was on the wrong track. That probably averages out to something like 63% of the country, maybe 64, 65% of the country believing the country was on the wrong track. The results were equally dismal under President Joe Biden, as one might expect. What this suggests is that one's own, quote, philosophical, unquote, bias, whether you like capitalism over socialism, matters less than one's perception of whether the government is effectively implementing the policies that serve the interests of the people or not. When it comes to government, people tend to be more pragmatic than ideological. In short, the question of efficacy trumps dogma. By this standard, the, quote, communist, unquote, government in China is among the most popular in the world. Public opinion polls consistently show extraordinarily high levels of support for the central government. This may come as a surprise to many Americans who think they live in, quote, the freest country on earth, unquote. But it is true all the same. The Chinese people overwhelmingly support their government, do not regard it as authoritarian, think it is doing an excellent job of increasing prosperity and raising standards of living. Harvard Ash Center study, 2003 to 2016. This long-term survey, one of the most comprehensive by a Western institution, found that in 2016, 95.5% of Chinese respondents were either relatively satisfied, quote unquote, or quote unquote, highly satisfied with the central government in Beijing. Factors included economic progress, nationalist sentiment, and positive state media coverage. General Trends 20 to 25, studies like those from the China Data Lab 2023 and the China Leadership Monitor 2025 confirm high regime support, often above 80 to 90% based on questions about trust in the CPC, Communist Party of China, pride in the political system, and satisfaction with the economic performance. Support is tied to economic growth, e.g., poverty alleviation of 800 million people since 1978, and stability. Posts on X cite Harvard and other Western surveys claiming 90% of Chinese support the CPC, viewing its system as democratic and effective. These align with academic findings, but reflect pro-government narratives. The numbers are literally, quote, off the chart. They show that people in China overwhelmingly, quote, support and trust, unquote, their government, and think it is doing an excellent job of reducing poverty, lifting standards of living, and steering the country towards a peaceful and prosperous future. Frankly, that reminds me of polls.
Wars. They haven't had wars with people.
They haven't had wars with people since 1978, right? Okay, the numbers are literally off the chart. They show that people in China overwhelmingly support and trust their government, think it's doing an excellent job of reducing poverty, lifting standards of living, steering the country towards a peaceful and prosperous future. That reminds me of the way people here in the United States in polling felt about the United States government in the 1950s and 1960s. We used to have general feelings of satisfaction with the government here some time ago, when people believed the government most often was acting in the interest of the people. This was true whether the government was a Republican government or a Democratic government in the 1950s or 1960s. Things were very different here at that time in relation to popular support for the government. It isn't hard to figure out why things have changed so far here. Now, here's a graphic, a global manufacturing output comparison chart. And it gives scores and graphically represents various nations of the world. And the scores are based in trillions of dollars. And you notice that China is the biggest ball here and accounts for $5 trillion of manufacturing output during the period of the graphic. Russia's only 0.36 million. You see, Russia is quite small. Mexico, by comparison, was at 0.33, and India slightly larger at 0.6. When we move over to the other side of the scale, we see the United States is at 2.5 trillion. So 50% of the manufacturing output of China, but a large amount, nevertheless. And you could ask whether can you really expect that the manufacturing output of a country of 340 million people would be more than comparable to a nation with 1.4 billion people, 4 times as large. It may still be that the manufacturing output of the United States per capita is higher than the manufacturing output of China per capita. But nevertheless, in overall manufacturing output, China is twice as large as the United States right now. Some other important nations are Japan, $1.2 trillion, Germany, $0.9 trillion. Germany has probably gone down in recent years. South Korea, $0.5 trillion. The figure for Italy is 0.35, similar to that, of Mexico and Russia, a number of other places. It's interesting that South Korea has a higher manufacturing output, than Russia, or did anyway when these statistics applied.
Hmm.
I think China's improved their transportation.
Oh, absolutely. Done
It's
wonders
amazing.
with transportation, done wonders with infrastructure. But all we're talking about here is manufacturing. That's what this chart was about. Given the disparity between the results in the US and China, we wonder if Americans' preference for capitalism and over socialism reflects a clear understanding of how each system actually works, or if their opinions have been largely shaped by propaganda. I think that question is very understated. It's clearly the case that preferences are shaped by propaganda, but it's also true that the labels capitalism and socialism, are very vague and don't describe the reality, in either country. In China, obviously, there's a very large element of capitalism which has been very important in the advance of China and the continuing advance of China. And we might wonder, about the dominance of capitalism here in the United States, because if it is capitalism, it's nowhere near the classic vision of capitalism that we saw during the 19th century. In other words, this is an oligarchic form of capitalism here in the United States that is in many ways becoming more and more similar to feudalism, where these very large firms are so dominant that we have a society where employees are bound to those firms and look to those firms for a comprehensive sort of support that doesn't exist, in purely capitalist types of systems. In other words, it's arguable whether we anymore live under a capitalist sort of system as opposed to a quasi-feudal system. And it's arguable how socialist the system is in China, or how socialist our system is here. Because the labels don't describe the realities in our nation, I think. Anyway, Mike goes on to say, bottom line, people care less about ideology than they do about jobs, health care, stable prices, good education, and some reasonable government accommodation to take care of people who are too old or sick or mentally impaired to provide for themselves. They want a government that will create an environment where they can make a decent living and raise their children in safety. These are not extravagant demands. Even so, they do not appear to be a priority among Washington's political class. The interesting thing, though, is they do appear to priority among China's political class. And we might well ask why this is the case. Because I think they used to be a priority among our political class during the war and during the post-war period. There are many reasons why China is doing better in this regard than the United States. Special interests, corruption, etc., but certainly incentives play a significant role. In the U.S., millionaires can get to be billionaires overnight without contributing anything of value to society. It's just a matter of how adept they are at trading paper assets on Wall Street. In America, the market system is so degraded that companies are allowed to buy back hundreds of billions of their own stock in order to push share prices higher, allowing them to skim hefty profits off the shuffling of paper. These buyback transactions are entirely legal, even though the capital is deployed in a way that fails to boost productivity, R&D, worker training, um, 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 innovation, um, 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 or anything else. It is simply a way to fiddle the system in order to enrich professional speculators. In the US, wealth is generated through financial engineering, not through productivity, efficiency, uh, 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 or innovation. As we said earlier, the incentives are all wrong. Here's a graphic, made in China, sold on Amazon. The share of items sold on Amazon by country of origin. China, 71% of the items sold on Amazon come from China. 30% come from the US. 14% come from India. 6% come from Germany, 5% from Mexico, 5% from Japan, 5% uh, uh, from Vietnam, 26% from the rest of the world. I'm surprised by the percentage that is coming from Vietnam. That's very interesting. I'm surprised that the percentage coming from Japan is also so low these days, considering how important the Japanese were in the 1980s. I think the Indian percentage is getting fairly important, and that's also surprising. But it's interesting to look at this in terms of share in items, sold on Amazon. This source came from Statista. Statista. If the Western style system actually deployed capital to productive outlets of investment, then one would not expect the country with the largest and most liquid markets in the world to also have rising poverty, a shrinking middle class, surging homelessness, falling standards of living, in some of the most dilapidated, out-of-date infrastructure in the developed world. But in the US, capital is not deployed to productive outlets of investment. It is recycled into a financial system that functions as a wealth generation mechanism, for voracious billionaires who use their money to buy yachts, luxury mansions, and glissy baubles at Tiffany. Take a look. Total stock buybacks in 2024, according to S&P Dow Jones indices, S&P 500 companies spent a record $942.5 billion on stock buybacks in 2024. This figure represents an 18.5% increase from the $795.2 billion spent in 2023. In the last decade, 2015 to 2024, that sum soars to 7.33 trillion. 7.33 trillion, says Mike. Even worse, a sizable portion of the money devoted to stock buybacks is coming from massively underfunded public pension funds that retired workers depend on for their survival. According to Brian Reynolds, chief market strategist at New Albion Partners, quote, pension funds have to make 7.5%, unquote. So they're putting their money in these levered credit funds that mimic the long-term capital management fund in the 1990s, unquote. Okay, by the way, LTCM went bankrupt after a scandal, I believe, if I recall correctly, in the early 2000s. Those funds, in turn, quote, buy enormous amounts of corporate bonds from companies which put cash onto company balance sheets, and they use it to jack their stock price up either through buybacks or mergers and acquisitions. It's just a daisy chain of financial engineering, and it's probably going to intensify in coming years, unquote. This comes from how a public pension crisis is driving an epic credit boom, unquote. That article appeared in Financial Sense. Here's more. The buybacks, stock buybacks, S&P 500 companies spent a record $942.5 billion on buybacks in 2024, roughly $1 trillion in 1 year. Also dividends, S&P 500 dividends reached $629.6 billion in 2024, up 7% from 2023. Total shareholder returns, if you combine the buybacks and dividends, they totaled $1.572 trillion in 2024. For context, a 2019 to 22 study of 280 large U.S. corporations reported $4.4 trillion in profits, with $4.4 trillion spent on buybacks and dividends, suggesting a near 100% payout ratio for some firms. Think about that for a minute. So between the years 2019 and 2022, every dime of profit was diverted to personal enrichment. Explain to me how this embraces the capitalist ideal of deploying resources to productive activity. Is it any wonder why China has left the U.S. in the dust? This explains why business investment capex is at record lows. It's because the bulk of earnings is being recycled into buybacks, which in turn is being used to further inflate the asset bubble on Wall Street. It's a big circle, and it can all be traced back to cheap money, artificially low rates, easily available credit, and financial engineering. Corporations no longer look for ways to grow their businesses, expand operations, hire more employees, improve productivity, or innovate. Instead, they look for ways to load up on debt, goose their stock price, and walk away with a bundle. This is the skyline. I don't know what it's the skyline of. I'll bet it's the skyline of a Chinese city, but I don't know which one. It's all about incentives, and the Fed has created incentives that encourage leveraging debt, manipulation of stock, and fraud, whereas other governments incentivize growth and productivity. The quote, profit motive, unquote, is supposed to be the energy that fuels the capitalist system and leads to innovation, to efficiency, and productivity. But as you can see, buybacks of stock undermine those outcomes by diverting money into personal enrichment and elite indulgences, which begs the question of whether the current system is really capitalist at all. I think that's a really good question. I raised that a little earlier, didn't I? We should also note that in 2024, an estimated $235 billion, 25% of the $942 billion total of S&P 500 buybacks of stock were purchased with credit, which points to a gigantic asset bubble that will cause severe damage to the broader economy when markets fall sharply. In contrast to the U.S. model, the Chinese government prioritizes productivity and growth over financial engineering, asset stripping, or profiteering. They see the financial system as a means to an end, and that end is the creation of a prosperous and harmonious society in which all boats rise, quote unquote. And here's a picture of, I guess, the shopping area in that sort of a society. Actually, kind of reminds me of one shopping area in Reston, Virginia. It's kind of interesting. Along with its 4-decade-long industrialization policy that has transformed China, in the world's biggest manufacturing superpower, China launched another massive project in 2013 called the Belt and Road Initiative, which is the largest and most ambitious infrastructure project in history based on its scale, scope, and global impact. From 2013 to 2024, China has invested over $1 trillion in BRI projects, with
Mm-hmm.
121.7 billion allocated in 2024 alone. The BRI spans more than 150 countries across Asia, Africa, Europe, and Latin America, covering 60 to 75% of the world's population and over 30% of global GDP. This is a quote, by the way. It includes roads, railways, ports, pipelines, and digital infrastructure. Over 3,000 projects have been completed or are underway, including the 68 billion China-Pakistan economic corridor, CPEC, the 13.6 billion Jakarta-Bandung high-speed railway, and numerous African rail and port developments, unquote. No infrastructure project in history comes close to the BRI's $1 trillion investment or 150 country scope. It's frequently compared to a, quote, 21st century Marshall Plan, unquote, but with broader geopolitical impact. BRI not only links remote locations to markets around the world, it also increases the speed at which products and merchandise can be delivered to wholesale, and to retail buyers. The visionary project anticipates a world in which economies are deeply integrated, spreading prosperity to places across the planet. The World Bank estimates the initiative will lift global GDP significantly while reducing poverty in areas that are affected by improved infrastructure and increased trade. No other project rivals its scale or vision. The difference between America's hyper-financialized model of capitalism and China's state-led model could not be starker. Keep in mind, the Belt and Road Initiative invested a meager $121.7 billion in projects in over 150 countries in 2024, while U.S. corporations dumped nearly $1 trillion into buybacks of stock that added nothing to overall productivity. Even with that paltry commitment of resources, China is credited with building the most transformative infrastructure project in history. There's a graphic of one belt, and one road. And look, there's a connection from Belgium to Moscow, and then to Istanbul, and on the other side from Belgium to Italy to Greece, going all the way down, to Djibouti and to Kenya.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then across to India. And on the other route from Moscow to Istanbul, to Tehran, to places in Central Asia, unnamed, to Urumqi. I don't even know where that is. I think it's a place, in Inner Mongolia, in China, and then to Xi'an, okay, in central China. Okay, the parts in yellow on this graphic, okay, are Silk Road, economic developments, and the lines in blue, are maritime initiatives. Okay, among the maritime initiatives, uh, 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 they proceed from Guangzhou to Hanoi, to Malaysia, to Jakarta, India, Kuala Lumpur, okay, and to Colombo, okay, in Ceylon,
Mm.
okay, and up to what looks like an Indian port or a port in the eastern part, okay, of Pakistan. From the map, I'm not able to tell the difference here, but obviously these are huge projects. China does not reinvest all the profits from its state-owned enterprises into production in sectors like energy, telecom, and infrastructure, for example. Profits are frequently reinvested to expand capacity or develop new technologies, unquote. Whereas, quote, state-owned hydropower companies, unquote, may, quote, use profits to fund dam projects, unquote. Surprisingly, a portion of the profits from state-owned industries are distributed as dividends, and yes, even as buybacks of shares, reflecting a focus on shareholder returns rather than solely reinvesting in production. But these distributions fail in comparison to those in the U.S. that pay out nearly 100% of annual earnings. In short, there is much more money available to support, quote, broader state objectives, such as infrastructure and social welfare programs. And the amount of money we're talking about is simply staggering. Consider this, quote, China's state-owned enterprises account for 30 to 40% of China's GDP and control about 68% of total firm capital, which attests to the truly unprecedented economic power of the government. In 2021, central state-owned enterprises reported net profits of $283.56 billion, $100 billion of which went to the Belt and Road Initiative. I guess from previous quotes, we would expect 121 billion went to the Belt and Road Initiative. In 2023, China's state-owned enterprises generated 650 billion in profits. Okay, and the heavy majority of which was devoted to production, innovation, efficiency, critical infrastructure, and social programs. Is it any wonder why the Chinese people are so, quote, satisfied, unquote, with their government? This isn't a matter of capitalism versus communism. Yeah, I completely agree with that. It's a matter of good government versus lousy government. Virtually all the profits extracted from our, quote, free market, unquote, system go into the pockets of people who need the money the least and who fail to contribute anything of value to the, quote, greater good, unquote. Contrast, the Chinese government is pumping nearly every penny into improvements that benefit everyone, that have transformed the country into a shining example of 21st century of the modernity of the 21st century. Shockingly, our leaders in Washington still think the United States can, quote, outcompete, unquote, and even surpass China if we put our minds to it and make it a national priority. But anyone who can, quote, do the math, unquote, can see that's not going to happen. It's simply a matter of which country has the superior development model. And in that regard, China has us beat um, um, hands down. I completely agree with that, but okay, I don't agree that is an an inevitability. But if we want to change it, we do have to change our political system. We have to kick the role of money out of our political system. We have to dump the corruption. We probably have to get rid of most of the people in the two houses, of Congress. And we have to change the president, of course, as well. We have to elect people who are devoted to the public purpose of the United States, which includes, of course, the well-being of the people of the United States. Our legislations, our policies, both domestic and foreign, have to be devoted to the public purpose. They are not now devoted to the public purpose. They are devoted to enriching the few. That is what is wrong with our country. It's not capitalism as opposed to socialism. It's government for the public purpose, as opposed to government by and for the few. That is what we have to change. What parts of that new government will be devoted to central planning, and what parts, to market system, will be something that we can determine as we move through the changes. But we have to get rid, of the ideological orientation that says that capitalism is better than socialism and that socialism is better than capitalism. We have to use both the market and central and local planning according to the public purpose in order to guide the market competition that will go on, in our countries. And we have to devote ourselves to a mixed economy, which will incorporate both planning and market competition comprehensively. Note, to go on with the article, missed opportunities. Xi Jinping invited former Secretary of State John Kerry to join the Belt of Road Initiative at its inception. But the Obama administration rejected the offer. Kerry called it, quote, the single biggest opportunity of my life, unquote. There's a video about this that is 22 seconds long. And Arnaud Bertrand says on Twitter, he says, the West also dramatically misunderstands the BRI. He reveals, which I think is an exclusive, never heard it before, that they first proposed to John Kerry to do it jointly, which the U.S. didn't even want to consider. So the Belt and Road Initiative, as far as the Chinese were concerned, could have involved the U.S. as much as the Chinese. That's amazing. And we just blew it. That is just amazing. There's another tweet from Bertrand. Late in the video, Thornton revealed that Kerry told him that not taking up Chinese offer to jointly do the BRI was, quote, the single biggest missed opportunity of my life. And that's it for that article. I guess I've done all the commentary on it that I want to do. At this point, I think it's a very critical article. I think if you take the Wabin article and then consider it in the context of, the Mike Whitney article, or vice versa, these two articles make a very compelling case for a mixed economy devoted to the public purpose.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we should be doing here in the United States.
Right, that's what we should be doing.
And when we devote it to the public purpose, then the economic system, the economic approach that is for the public purpose and that is concerned with maximizing the public purpose is modern money theory. That is the approach to economics that we ought to be taking. So, any comments on that, Dee?
No, it's a very, very, very straightforward, to the point. You know, it was very good, well written. And we've talked about this before with Hamiltonian, how China's using what we should have been using all along.
Yes, and what if we had followed our earlier attitudes towards development, those we had in the 19th century near the beginning of the Republic, we would have developed something similar to what China has now.
Hmm.
But what happened was in the intervening period of time, when the monopolies developed, they dominated capitalism here in the United States during the early 1900s. They were thrown back in terms of their control by the Roosevelt administration, and the post-war period. But when the shift to Reaganism started in the 1980s, and we, began to put profits over people, in the economy, and the ideology of neoliberalism gained hold again, we fell under the control of the largest and richest of corporations, not only because of the economic dominance they have, but because of how they've corrupted our political system with the money they used to buy off our representatives. The key to change is to end this particular corruption. And that can only be done through a dump the corruption movement that ejects the representatives who are taking the big money. All of them, in both parties. And this has got to be a bipartisan thing. We have to dump the corruption.
Exactly.
So, we're at 69 people now, so we've grown through the stream considerably. I think we started off at something in the low 30s. But anyway, John B. says Trump has shown his hand. It is up to the Senate or other constitutional lawyers to defeat this act. Failure to defeat is not an option. Yeah, failure to defeat would end separation of powers, in this country. It would make the judiciary subordinate, to the executive. And of course, as long as MAGA controls the political system, we have the Congress subservient to the executive as well. Have to change this. Mr. Wonderful says, America has a little-known safety net program for citizens that lose their jobs through no fault of their own. It covers their cost of living, travel, etc., until they're back on their feet. That program is known as WIA. What does WIA stand for, Mr. Wonderful? And Mr. Wonderful says, the problem is America doesn't educate Americans about it, not even schools, including college. There are zero proactive efforts to get homeless off the streets, provide counseling to identify problems, and provide solutions. I think America needs to get rid of most senators. Congress has problems too. Needs to get rid of most of the Congress too. I mean, the people in the House of Representatives are bought. Almost all of them are bought. If you look at the financial facts, most of the Congress people are dominated by contributions larger than $200 from various sources. I think financial contributions of that are above $200 should be outlawed. WIA stands for the Workforce Investment Act. Thank you, Mr. Wonderful. Joe, did you see Sam Cedar had, Mark Blythe on? It was a very good conversation. No, thank you, Lana. I did not see that. I would appreciate a link to the conversation, since Mark is very, very good and always interesting, much more interesting than Sam Cedar. Mr. Wonderful says WIA has been around for over 30 plus years and is for all citizens for life in all 50 states. Thank you, Mr. Wonderful. The Workforce Investment Act. I've got to research that. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Wonderful, for the suggestion. John B. says, regrettably, Joe, I think change will only come after a catastrophic collapse. Only then will the oligarchs be sufficiently disempowered. I'm not going to disagree with that, but John B., I think we're moving towards, such a social collapse. Okay, I only hope that it won't be so severe that the suffering, is overwhelming. Lana says, the link won't work on YouTube. I will email it to you. Thank you, Lana. John B. says, that is also my fear, more pain and suffering before real change to benefit the average person. Yeah, I think we all agree that is the likelihood, but we can hope for something more. We can hope for a movement that is going to dump the corruption, and that can be effective by 2028, at least, or maybe even be effective enough by 2026 to block the worst of what the Trump administration is now trying to do. Well, we've been on the air now for 3 hours and 13 minutes. So we've had very good exercise tonight. I think it's time for us to say goodnight. Thank you all for coming, and thank you all for staying. The indicator is showing we have 69 people here. That is very good for us. And thank you, D, for coming, and thank you for staying and for participating.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Okay, I very much appreciate it. Also, thank you, Bonnie, for sitting through the whole thing.
I liked it.
And Mr. Wonderful says, that's a long time. It was a pleasure. Take care. Well, thank you, Mr. Wonderful. And Lana says, good night. And John B. says, bye all. Yes, good night, everyone. I will be back on Tuesday, and I'm sure Dee will be back before then with a very good show. Have you any plans right now, Dee?
Possibly most likely Monday. I'll be back on Monday.
Okay.
Good night.
Good night, Bonnie.
Okay, good night, Dee. Have a very good day tomorrow.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
And on Monday. And good night, everybody.
You too.
So I will end the stream.